So today's webinar is LEAD4Safety, the Model and Force Strategies, going to be presented by Dr. Tristan Casey. He is an expert in safety leadership and organisational culture with a career in workplace health and safety spanning 12 years. He has consulted nationally and internationally across a diverse range of industries such as law enforcement, local government, utilities, offshore oil and gas, construction and manufacturing. So thanks for joining us today, Tristan, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Yeah, it's lovely to be here today. The first webinar that I've done with MyOsh, so I'm really excited to share some of the research and practical implications of that with you today. As you mentioned, I do have a bit of an expertise or an interest in safety leadership. I've recently just been working on a project within the healthcare sector as well, so I've shared a little bit about that towards the end. But today we're here to, I guess, make sense of safety leadership, because it's one of those topics that gets thrown around a lot of, similar to the phrase safety culture. It means a lot of different things to different people. And rather than sort of give you yet another competing idea or a different, model to sort of add to your list, I sort of take the approach of trying to integrate a lot of, sorry, just checking. Yeah, this will sound okay. That my sounds great. Rather than to present another competing model, I guess what I'm trying to do is integrate a lot of different ideas into one framework. So trying to take the best of what we already know about what works for the safety leadership, and I guess really use that as a way to sort of advance the field forward. So today we'll be covering a few things, which I'll get into in a moment. But a little bit about me, so just to expand on what Sarah went there. I guess what she was saying is, a little bit about my background. I'm an organizational psychologist, and this is a picture of me and my team. So we work with here at Griffith University. But I also have a sort of a private venture as well, which is called LEAD4Safety, which is really focused on this particular model. And that's a collaboration with a professor over in Western Australia, Mark Griffin, who was the original, founder of the idea. And then through my PhD research and subsequent research, I've been able to flesh out this LEAD model a little bit more and put some meat to the bones and maybe make it a little bit more practical than it was. But safety is such a fascinating topic. I mean, it's one of those things where it's the perfect blend of psychology and also the technical or tangible parts of an organization. So not only is it about engineering, basically implementing the right controls, reducing the risks through physical controls, but also there's a lot of mental activity or sort of psychology that goes behind safety, as you'd be well aware. And so safety leadership is that really nice nexus between actually doing things in practice, the physical tasks that people perform and how they do the various safety activities, but also how to persuade them, how to motivate them, how to inspire them, how to make sure that basically as a leader, we are trying to really, maximize the impact of our safety initiatives. So that's really where I like to play in terms of my expertise is, making that connection between maybe our safety management systems, our various tools and resources, our physical tools that we have in our organizations, and the practices that people implement there on the ground. So what I'm going to cover today, just a little agenda to make sure that we're on the same page about what we're aiming for. So, firstly, what is safety leadership? It's a pretty fundamental topic, but I think it'd be nice to spend a couple of minutes just talking about that and getting clarity on exactly what we're all talking about here. We'll introduce the LEAD model and sort of talk at a high level what it looks like, what some of the practice might be, and then end on a couple of case studies so you can see how other organizations have used LEAD, perhaps give you some confidence that this model is useful, a bit of evidence, a bit of backstory there about the versatility of the model, and maybe it might be something that you would be interested in exploring for your organization, or even if you're a supervisor and you're looking for some sort of framework or way to organize your leadership strategies, today will be relevant to you as well. So hopefully we'll be able to tick off all of these different questions here. And also today, I wanted to make sure that we were interactive. So there'll be some questions posed. By all means, jump into the chat box and type some answers. I'd love to kind of hear from you as well. I know it's a bit difficult given we've got quite a few people on the line, but anyway, it'd be lovely to sort of hear from a few of you and get that interaction happening. So in terms of the outcomes after the webinar today, what you should be able to do, this is what I think we should aim for, is understanding and be able to sort of advise or explain what safety leadership is to other people. Maybe just give them a fresh perspective on maybe where safety leadership comes from, reflect on your own practice as a safety leader and how potentially you might expand that idea of safety leadership. And lastly, maybe one or two small changes you can start to make in your organization, whether it be a conversation with your team, maybe a peer, another supervisor or another manager. How could you maybe give them some value about what safety leadership is and try and sort of give them another framework or another idea that might be helpful to organize their practice. So defining, advising, and influencing others. That's the three things we'll tick off today. So to start the webinar, probably a good place to have a little bit of a chronological view on the evolution of safety leadership. So there's really, if you look at the literature or the research around this particular topic, I think there's about 4 different categories or key development points within the safety leadership timeline. So initially, a lot of the safety leadership focused on what we might call the transactional style. In the general management literature or the general management sphere, we talk about this idea of transactional and transformational leadership as being two complementary but quite different styles of leadership, and that's been applied to the safety setting as well. If we think about the first kind of mentions of safety leadership, it really was embedded in that idea of behavior-based safety. The idea that a leader would focus on, trying to embed safe practices, reward and recognize successful implementations of those practices, but also apply punishment and discipline to make sure that, there's a minimum standard of safety being achieved. So you can think about that as a really foundational or fundamental set of leadership skills that everyone should have. But ultimately, it's going to fall short if our goal is to sort of help people internalize or be motivated themselves to actually start to adopt safety as a personal value or as a personal objective that they want to achieve in the organization. It's sort of like a surface level safety leadership that we're trying to implement there. So that was where we started our journey. Behavioral leadership is focused on getting the practices right, embedding and reinforcing the good ones, and trying to extinguish or minimize the less effective safety practices. Fast forward a little bit and we start to jump into this more, values-based leadership with, Shell and British Petroleum or BP investing in the Hearts and Minds program. And that's really where this sort of individualized concern came to the fore and really, flavored this idea of safety leadership, that as a good safety leader, we should be showing genuine care and concern for our team members, being a little bit humble and authentic in our receptivity to feedback. So basically asking our team, is there anything that I could do differently to improve safety? Is there anything I can do about my leadership to make it more effective? And just, I guess, focusing on the quality of that relationship between leader and team member. So that was the second step in the safety leadership journey. The third step was starting to introduce this idea of, as I mentioned before, transformational leadership. And that was really around the early 2000s. There was a paper or an article that was published in the research sphere that's been heavily cited or referenced, I guess, in future publications. And that was the first attempt at trying to translate this idea of the transformational leadership into the safety area. We could think of transformational leadership a bit like charismatic and visionary leadership. So a really kind of engaging, inspiring communication style, really focused on the future and communicating this sort of strategy or vision for safety in the organization, and helping people to understand, well, what do I need to do as an individual to kind of help our organization get to that ideal outcome. So really it was, this sort of charismatic approach to leadership, which is, I guess, a little bit personality based. Some people might be more inclined to be that way than others. Still trainable, but some people will have a broader range of ability and maybe an initial talent for that particular style of leadership. And then finally, we come to maybe the more recent developments in safety leadership, where it's what I like to call the strategic approach to safety leadership. So not just investing all our eggs in one basket. We're not saying, the behavioral approach is best, the charismatic approach, or the hearts and minds approach is best. We're saying, look, all of them have their utility, all of them have their usefulness. And really it's up to the leader to figure out, well, what's the best situation in which to apply these different styles? How do I adapt and sort of be dynamic in my safety leadership approach to make sure that, you know, I'm having the most optimal outcome on my team that I can in that particular situation. So it's really taking safety leadership into this sort of more dynamic, more evolving space, which is pretty exciting. So first time to get your thoughts or get you involved in the webinar. So I wanted to ask you a pretty fundamental question. How would you define safety? If you could think of a couple of words, maybe a little phrase, you know, this thing called safety that we throw around a lot, how would you define it? I'll give you a couple of moments to just maybe go to the chat. If you can't find it, it's up. There should be a little bar at the top of your window, and you're able to type in a response in the chat box there. So how would you define safety? Thanks, Karen. So caring, that sort of individualized concern, that's really good. Richard, yeah, protecting, that's one of the things that comes to my mind as well, is maybe protecting them from harm, reducing risk, that type of thing, very much a prevention-oriented approach. Had another one, resilience, reducing harm from John. Izzy, feeling safe. So yeah, I think that's some good examples of maybe the common things that come to mind. And when I ask this question in maybe the face-to-face workshops, people do tend to cluster around that idea of protection, prevention, you know, reducing risk, eliminating the bad things that happen. Very much what we call you know, this sort of overarching prevention approach to safety. So that's one way that we can think about it. And it's the most sort of established way of thinking about safety. And I really like the fact that others in the room or the virtual room have started to maybe think from the other side and say, well, maybe safety is about the presence of something positive. Maybe it's about building capacity to do things well or to be successful in the work. So I think that definitely we need to recognize that there's both aspects there. So thanks for the suggestions, guys. Another quick question for you. What do you think this means for your practice of safety leadership? So if you define safety as being about protection or, you know, reducing the level of risk, what would that mean for the types of things that you or your team might be doing to lead safety? Maybe we'll just focus on that prevention idea for now to keep our conversation nice and focused. So if you were the type of person that would, you know, define safety as prevention, reducing risk, all those types of preventative activities, what might you be doing as a safety leader to actually make that happen? Leading by example, communicating. So I guess lead by example could mean sort of role modeling the safety standards that you expect others to show. Confirming that, like, so Kevin, I like that. So it's being sort of monitoring and checking that the controls are there, they've got good integrity, they're up to date, they're being monitored. Heath, critical conversations, I like that too. So that's sort of like maybe addressing some performance issues or basically being courageous to actually confront people if they are demonstrating maybe a less helpful type of practice. Learn from each event, Britta, I like that too. I think that's very much a part of what a safety leader should be doing, is basically when things go wrong, we're actually trying to understand why and do our incident analysis, but doing such in a way that actually creates this sort of psychological safety and ability to learn. Okay, thanks, guys. So we've got quite a range again of different ideas, which is always good to see that obviously we've got a very diverse bunch of safety leaders in the room today. And really, I guess the key point is that leaders should be doing all of these things. And maybe the missing ingredient for us is, well, how do we know when to do these certain things and under what situations or what kind of scenarios would those practices be the most effective? And that's where the LEAD model can potentially help us. So going back to this idea of how we achieve safety, if you look at the evolution of the ideas of what safety is and how it's managed, there's roughly 5 different groupings, 5 different categories. So if we go back to the very early phases of safety with the Tayloristic ideas of scientific management, this idea that in an industrial setting, we have to have, you know, really robust, rigorous procedures. We sort of have the separation of the leaders from the workers. We need to make sure that people are basically breaking down their tasks and doing each task in the safest way possible, and then checking whether they're complying with that best way to do things. And that is a really kind of embedded or older practice that still is very relevant to safety today. So most people might not realize that this idea of procedures and compliance to achieve safety is sort of 150 years old or 100 years old. And it's such as has allowed us to have many, great gains in safety performance. That sort of idea of Tayloristic principles, scientific management has resulted in a lot of gains. But maybe we're sort of starting to see some petering out of that approach, and there needs to be an addition to that approach to make things, more effective in this modern dynamic age. So that's the first idea: procedures and compliance. The second idea is what we might call the human factors, sort of this ergonomics approach, that rather than make the person fit the job with the procedure and the compliance, we've got to come at it from a different angle and say, well, let's adjust the work, let's change the task, let's adjust the environment so that it's actually the most optimal one for the worker to be successful. So you can start to see these early ideas around safety being not just the prevention of harm, but also the presence of positive capacities is, again, fairly old. This is sort of 1940s, 1945, around the Second World War. Human factors and ergonomics was really starting to gain popularity, and was really born out of the idea that, we can't necessarily be reactive. We have to be more proactive to ensure safety. We have to sort of anticipate where things could fail or where we want people to do well, and really engineer their conditions or their environment to make it the most optimal one for their work. Now, the third one is probably around the 1960s, when we started to see very complex technologies like nuclear power, military applications, international ballistic missiles, those types of things. And, this sort of procedure-based idea or really focusing on the individuals in the organization and the behaviors just wasn't adequate. And so we started to see the development of safety management systems, this sort of more organizational level type intervention, which is, again, a hallmark of today's approaches, that we have systems and standards that we implement, we audit against them, and we try and do things proactively to kind of collect evidence that our system is safe, that our organization is safe. And this is, again, adding to our kind of ideas about what safety is. It's sort of up-leveling it from the individual up to the higher levels in the organization. Around the 1980s, after Chernobyl, of course, and the nuclear meltdown, the safety culture started to become popular and really started to build momentum in the 90s and early 2000s. But based on this idea that if you have the right culture in your organization, then that should also add to this sort of mix of safety improvement activities or safety achievement. So the way people think, the beliefs that they have, the assumptions that may be a little bit unconscious or not quite, accessible to people, the way that they think will actually influence their perception of their world and also drive the types of behaviors that they show. So again, we sort of look at the organization as a whole, and what are some of the shared beliefs that people have? What do they think about safety? How are incidents prevented? How are they managed? What's the best way to identify a hazard, or how do you interact with your fellow colleagues in the organization? All the answers to these questions are ones that determine what type of culture you might have in your organization. So by creating the right culture, we can also create safety. And then most recently, sort of 90s and beyond, maybe even a little bit sooner, sort of 2010s onwards, we see the idea of resilience engineering. So maybe some of you have heard that term. It's a very kind of recent development in safety management, but it's really founded on this idea that, rather than looking at safety from a prevention or a, reducing risk, reducing negatives type approach, rather we have to look at it from a more positive angle in addition to that existing approach. So developing the capability to be successful, looking at where people vary or deviate and understanding why they do that, rather than necessarily coming in and enforcing compliance straight away. So the idea of safety being about developing capability fits really nicely with some of the ideas that you were talking about before, like coaching and mentoring and training. And arguably a safety leader should be, managing safety using all these different approaches. I've got a bit of a more humble approach to what safety is. I think that all these different approaches add value, rather than saying that one's better than the other, or there's one sort of essential solution that we should all be adhering to. So as a safety leader, it's really important to understand, where does safety come from? What are the ideas and models and theories that underpin it? And how does that guide my practice? So that might be one of the questions that we could ask ourselves now, is if you look at this list and you think about, what sort of approach do I provide or do I implement with my own safety leadership, or the leaders in my organization implement? Which one, if you could pick one from the list, what's kind of your default position, do you think? What sort of theory or what sort of model for your safety leadership informs your own practice? Have a think and pop into the chat there if you like. If you don't feel comfortable sharing, that's okay. I just was wondering if you felt comfortable just outlining which one of these approaches maybe underpins your practice. So Izzy, thanks. You're talking about adjusting, being kind of adaptable as a leader. I think that probably fits with maybe the cultural piece or the developed capability. Someone said culture, so that's saying that they're maybe more about developing a shared belief about the value or importance of safety in their organization. And a few people are saying, well, maybe we use all of these things, and that's maybe one of the the more effective strategies to use, is identifying little bits and pieces from each approach that might be helpful for you as a safety leader. And others are saying, well, maybe it's more the cultural piece and the developed capabilities. So maybe more of the contemporary ideas are influencing your practice, things like high reliability organizing, the idea that we have to create a mindfulness in our organization, this sort of appreciation of risk, this pessimism towards that we've got everything covered. That again can be quite a helpful approach to the way that we lead safety. So thanks, guys. That's good to hear a little bit about what informs your practice. So if we started to think about, the types of practices that might underpin, and I just saw Britta's comment there. So the business prefers procedures, but maybe there's a misalignment between the safety beliefs of management and the actual beliefs and practices of the safety personnel in the organization. That can be quite a tricky position to be in. So yeah, I wanted to acknowledge that there. So if we do sort of think about how our beliefs regarding safety shape our leadership practice, we can start to align each one of these little models or theories with some example behaviors that people might demonstrate. So if we sort of focus in on the procedure and compliance approach, well, of course, we're going to be more of a behavioral type strategy, punishing for non-compliance, perhaps providing sanctions if people don't follow the rules. Observing practices, you might do safety walkthroughs in your organization, or some sort of behavioral checklist like the DuPont STOP program, and sort of verifying whether compliance is going on. If that was really the main approach to safety in your organization, there's probably some missed opportunities, because that's just one ingredient in the safety toolbox that we should be using. Of course, people need feedback on their performance. Of course, people need recognition. Of course, we need to verify that things are being done out there in the workplace. But if all of our eggs are in that basket, then maybe we're missing that opportunity to be a really diverse kind of, a more versatile safety leader. If we fit into the second box about human factors and ergonomics, well, maybe we're really doing a lot of work on looking at procedures and sort of how do we make them fit better with the task. How do we make sure that when people are reviewing a procedure and looking at a procedure, that it actually aligns with what they're doing in practice? Doing a lot of consultation with workers and a lot of sort of user-focused design. So when we implement maybe a new tool or a new machine, we're actually engaging with the workers and saying, look, tell us or show us how you do things normally, and how can we adapt this machine to fit within the limits of your performance, or the most effective and efficient way of doing the job for you. So it's really kind of a worker-centric approach. The third one, ongoing risk management. So doing lots of inspections, audits, looking at safety in design, for example. How do we anticipate where risks might come up in the construction phase, which is a very popular approach in sort of tier 1 construction, as you might know. And how do we basically identify the major hazards in our business and make sure that we've got consistent controls that work well. So more of a systems type approach, I guess, for that third model. The fourth one, so what we might be doing is, doing our safety leadership programs, trying to do some surveys on what safety climate or culture looks like in our organization, and coming up with plans and visions for the future. So more of an initiative-based safety program. And then lastly, if we're operating from the resilience engineering approach as safety leaders, we might be exploring the difference between work as done, the actual implementation, and maybe where people feel frustrated or concerned, or that there's kind of a mismatch between the way we think tasks should be done and the way it's actually done in practice. We might also be doing things like learning teams, reviewing what's gone wrong or what's gone right and learning from that for the future, and developing the capability to be effective under emergency conditions. So a diverse array of models and a diverse array of practices. How do we make sense of all this stuff? Some of you might have heard of the difference or the different terms Safety 1 and Safety 2. So if you haven't, encourage you to do a little bit of research on that and look up a fellow called Eric Holnagel. He's got a great collection of books that are very accessible. And he sort of summarizes this problem as a bit of a tension. That, on the one hand, as leaders, we need to avoid problems, we need to reduce incidents and adopt a preventative approach. And the way we do that as leaders or as safety managers is, controlling and identifying places where people vary or deviate from the best way to do the job. We try and create consistency and stability in the organization. We have tried and true procedures. We have tools and risk assessment methods that we want people to use consistently. And it's really all focused on reducing the risk of things going wrong. The other alternative approach, which is, I guess, newer and maybe less established, is safety is also about facilitating success. So this idea of sort of the two sides of the coin. On the one hand, it's about reducing failure. And on the other hand, it's also about promoting the positives that create a successful outcome. So rather than controlling variability, we have to understand it. Where's that variability coming from? When people deviate, is it due to the procedures being wrong or not quite relevant? Is it due to perhaps some constraints they're operating under with their resources? When people deviate, it's sort of the start of our safety journey, and we need to go down that tunnel with them to understand where is that variability coming from, maybe deeper in our organization. It's also about promoting autonomy and flexibility, which can be quite scary for some people in the safety realm or even in management, that to achieve safety, we actually have to release some of the constraints and actually provide people with opportunities to innovate, to think creatively, to maybe adapt the procedures to suit the work setting. The idea for this comes from the fact that, well, we can't possibly have procedures that suit every single setting. There's going to be times where the procedures don't quite fit, or there's an unexpected surprise that happens. And so we need to, on the one hand, have stability and consistency, and on the other hand, provide people with opportunities to have flexibility and autonomy. So there's a bit of a tension there that, it's a difficult tension that leaders have to navigate is, well, when do I do the safety 1 approach and when do I do the safety 2 approach? Is there a different kind of opportunity there? So we can present these two ideas that it's a bit of a paradox. On the one hand, that they both seem to be antagonistic, but we know deep in our hearts that, well, both of these approaches are probably necessary to be effective and achieve safety in our workplaces. So we've got a bit of a dilemma here. How do we understand when to do safety 1 and when to do safety 2, and how do we kind of translate that into practice? I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about, well, let's unpack some of the fundamental ideas that are behind safety 1 and safety 2. So if we think about this idea of safety 1 being more about prevention and stability, it might look a little something like this. And this is probably where we find ourselves operating a lot of the time as leaders or safety professionals out there in the workplace, is trying to prevent things from going wrong. So this sort of prevention approach, and trying to make things nice and predictable and stable in our work. We don't want any surprises. We want people to basically adhere to the best way to do the task. We want them to engage in really thorough and deep risk assessments, and use those outputs to basically implement the best controls possible, and do that work in the most in the safest and lowest risk way possible. So I guess the trap we can fall into is if our universe of safety ideas and tools it sort of focuses just on this prevention and stability strategy. Ultimately, there's at least another 3, as you can see by these little gaps here in the quadrants, of opportunities to maybe apply some different ideas and different scenarios. So where Safety 2 kind of comes in to help us is by expanding our model of safety management to say, well, sometimes we do need that prevention and stability approach, but other times we need the opposite. We need the promotion of success. We need the building of capability and the ability to do well under varying conditions. And also we need to actually release some of the constraints on people to provide them with the flexibility to adapt and to be strong, in sort of challenging situations. So the ideas of Safety 2 can start to flesh out our model of safety leadership and say, well, look, there's other opportunities to do different practices that will allow us to sort of achieve our goals. And that's really where the science of the LEAD model comes up, is being based on not one model or one approach being better than the other, but rather there's opportunities to show different aspects of those models at different times as we go about our work tasks. So this is a LEAD model. Wanted to kind of finally got to the core of the presentation, which is this model. So LEAD is a bit of an acronym which represents the different strategies that leaders can use in those different situations, underpinned by Safety 1 and Safety 2 ideas, underpinned by those 5 different models of safety management, to enable them to be effective in their roles. So just to go through it one by one, we might start with the defend strategy. So if you remember from the last slide, defend was maybe one of our fundamental or foundational safety leadership practices or strategies. So trying to prevent things going wrong, but also trying to ensure that the work is stable and predictable and consistent in its implementation. So defend is sort of like our traditional space of monitoring, ensuring that the right controls are in place, verifying that they are there, that they are maintained, and also dealing with maybe some of the deviations in a way that creates some learnings for people and sort of constrains them or brings them back to that best way of doing the task. So defend is sort of our position where we might be using those skills, those safety leadership skills, in the highest risk situations in our organization. So as a leader, being really clear about, well, what are our high risk tasks, developing a sort of a mental list or even a tangible physical list of those tasks, and recognizing that, well, that's the time I need to use my defend strategy, is when the risk is so high that, well, we have to basically make sure that we've got a very planful, very thorough, very detailed and stability oriented approach to our leadership practices. Flipping over to maybe the Safety 2 side of things with the leverage, energize and adapt, that's where we might have a little bit more flexibility and a different approach as a leader. So leverage is really trying to leverage the potential of our team to be successful. So this type of style of leadership is best used in routine environments. So maybe low risk tasks, everyday tasks that don't really have a heavy safety component, but we still want to reinforce the best ways. We want to make sure that safety doesn't drop off the agenda. So leverage is got a few different elements to it. I've just pulled out one here, which is the recognition factor. But it's also about high quality communication and coordination of the team, and setting clear goals about what they need to strive for and achieve when it comes to safety. So various targets or improvement at corrective actions, for example. What do we want? What are the practices we want our team to sort of proactively demonstrate? And let's reinforce and embed them in those routine low risk environments. And that's really where leverage, you should perhaps be spending a lot of time in the leverage space if you're not already. Energize is the next one. And that's really when we're in a time of change or in this sort of, turbulent type environment where we need to create some clarity about what we're striving towards. We need to basically develop and build the capability of our team to cope with that change. And really, I guess, involve our team in decision making. So the energize component probably maps closely onto that idea of transformational leadership, creating the vision of safety, trying to engage the team and involve them in what types of safety initiatives you're planning or putting in place. And of course, that coaching and mentoring space. So once we've got the vision, we've got the initiative, supporting the team to actually kind of get on board that change and implement it is really the energized flavor or essence. And then lastly, adapt. Of course, things go wrong, as is inevitable. So this model is not really based on the philosophy of zero harm, or that kind of elimination of incidents type approach. It's more about, well, mistakes will happen, incidents inevitably will occur, but the idea is let's continuously improve and try and prevent those things happening into the future. So adapt is on the prevention side of the model, if you remember the little label that's on here, and also focused on flexibility. So we, as a leader, need to encourage learning after mistakes occur. So it's not so much a blame culture, it's almost like this restorative culture, this idea that we need to engage with people on a meaningful level to help them repair the damage and also take the lessons away from that incident. It's also about a lot of the high reliability principles, this adapt quadrant. So creating resilience to emergency events, preparing for the worst scenarios, and really just kind of creating a feedback loop in the organization that continuously improves the situation. So hopefully that little tour of the LEAD model made sense. Leverage, energize, adapt, and defend is the 4 quadrants. And the key point is leaders need to be dynamic. They might need to shift between these different quadrants throughout a day's work. They might find themselves in defend 1 minute when they're doing a particular task. And then, well, something's come down from management in terms of a new initiative. Okay, as a leader, I need to jump into energize, G up the team, get them involved, get them participating, and develop their skills to execute. So the idea of LEAD is a situational specific model. People can jump between different quadrants and really use the best practices that reflect the situation. So what we might find ourselves doing in practice, this is just a very simple representation of some of the data that we've collected on LEAD. If we ask leaders to report their safety leadership practices, we typically get this type of profile that defend, they're very strong in that area. Whoops. Defend very strong. Adapt, they're doing a bit of that sort of learning and improvement approach, the incident investigations and learning from mistakes. And where we really fall down sometimes as leaders is the energize space and the leverage space. So this idea of really having good recognition, driving good performance, being clear about our goals and our communication there, and also the change management when new things are coming down, there's turbulent environment. Leaders may struggle to adequately engage their workers and bring them on board the journey. So it might be a nice point for you to reflect, thinking about your own practices where you might be stronger. We've seen some of the answers in the chat box that some people might be really effective at energize, maybe not so much at adapt perhaps, or different combinations of these various quadrants. So it's an opportunity for you to reflect and think, where might I try and grow my skills as a leader? Or the leadership skills of my colleagues or my team members to help them be more successful in their leadership role. So towards the end of the webinar now, I know you've been listening for a little while and I want some opportunities for questions and anything you wanted to clarify. I wanted to just talk through a couple of case studies. So the LEAD model was taken up by a company called Teys Australia. They're a meat manufacturing company. And they're actually successful at taking out the 2019 National Safety Council Award based upon a program that we developed for them around the LEAD model. So the way that Teys applied LEAD was more of a frontline supervisor level, which is probably the best kind of bang for buck if you're looking for development of your organization and the most effective use of some of your internal resources to build a safety culture. The way that Teys have implemented it, we engage with actual supervisors on the ground and involve them in the design and development of the program. So really a co-design approach to the whole thing. And that was then taken up by Teys and they delivered it across their organization themselves after some train the trainer. And this is the outcome they were able to achieve is some recognition at a national level for that particular project. LEAD model has also been adopted by WorkSafe Queensland. If you go to their website, you can see a little bit more information about it and also download some free resources that I created while I was there. I previously worked at WorkSafe Queensland a couple of years ago. And this was sort of my contribution to them, was to be able to flesh out the LEAD model, give them some resources and tools that industry can benefit from. So you'll be able to find a pretty comprehensive LEAD handbook there. If you wanted a free resource, you can jump on WorkSafe website and find that there. And we did a lot of development work with industry a few years ago around the LEAD model. Another place where you'll find LEAD is with the Electrical Safety Office, or the ESO. So Mr. Greg Skyring, the Electrical Safety Commissioner, adopted the LEAD model in partnership with Energy Skills Queensland. And what we did together was we created an industry-specific version of LEAD for the electrical sector. And I guess there's been a lot of kind of initiatives that Greg has implemented around LEAD. His idea of the strategy for the ESO is to drive industry level safety leadership change, as you can see on the plan here. And that partnership with Energy Skills Queensland is providing electrical contractors with access to a really cool training program, a survey that we created as well, and the ability to really build some good skills in your organization. So that's another opportunity to benefit from LEAD if you're in the electrical industry. And one of the most recent projects, as I mentioned at the start, is the implementation of the LEAD model within residential out-of-home care. So sort of more of in particular, we're applying it to reduce occupational violence and aggression. So we're still working on this project, but if you are in the healthcare or residential care or social assistance industries, this might be of interest to you. Is, what sorts of competencies or skills and capabilities do leaders need to have to be able to reduce occupational violence in the workplace? Really, the point of showing you all this was not to, sort of go on about how wonderful the LEAD model is, but just to talk about the versatility of the framework. So it's one of those frameworks where if you're wondering, how do I apply this in my organization? It's fairly high level. There is some opportunity there to customize it and make it tailored to your workplace. So I think that just the diversity of different industries where it's been successful so far, could provide you with some reassurance that this model works, and it is an effective one to drive some safety leadership development in your organization. So what did we learn? What will we learn? I guess, we talked about what is safety leadership. Remember, if we go back to the start of the webinar, we had those 4 little evolutions of safety: the behavioral, the hearts and minds, the transformational, and then finally this more strategic dynamic approach. We had a little look at some of the practices. There's a lot more to talk about there, but I don't want to eat up all my time today talking about that. We can have another conversation if you're happy to engage with me afterwards. And also translating the theory into practice. So as an academic, one of the things I love to do is try and have an impact with industry. Others have benefited from LEAD. It might be something that could help you. It might just be a little tool that you can put in your pocket and use to structure some of your safety leadership interactions or conversations that you have as you walk around with your staff. So yeah, happy to continue the conversation. But if you did have any questions, I'd love to spend some time now just answering them. You can either use the chat box or the question and answer box. So Sarah's happy to facilitate some of those Q&As. But yeah, happy to talk now, or otherwise please get in touch and we can have a further conversation. But thank you for your time.
Okay, we haven't got any questions just yet, but every time I say that, then we get some. So I'm just going to share in the chat a link to the upcoming webinars. There's a few coming up. On the next one, next week is Prevention is Not Enough. And that's by Valerie Hodges, who's probably at this webinar today. And then we've got Understanding Human and Organisational Performance on August the 5th. And then part 2 of that on August the 12th, applying the concepts of human and organisational performance in an organisational context. So hopefully we can see people for those. Yeah, we don't have any questions today, Tristan, which just means that you covered that information brilliantly. Oh, we do. Hold on. All right, Anonymous. My challenge is around getting buy-in from business management to adopt these different leadership approaches. Any suggestions that might help with this? And Tristan, by the way, this question comes up every week.
Yeah, it's a good one. I guess some of the challenges that I get is, I'm sort of preaching to the converted. People talk to us if they're sort of already past that particular stage of their journey. But I think, reflecting on some of the other projects that I've got is, talking about safety leadership as sort of a gateway into more broader improvement opportunities in the organization. So the thing with LEAD is, it does include that different idea about safety. So it's not just about compliance and sort of the traditional approach, but also how do we build the success to be capable and to cope with, different emerging situations. So that resilience idea, I think, is a conversation that appeals to business management. So rather than coming in with the safety angle, maybe come in with the resilience and the capability building angle, to say that you'll get spillover effects. You invest in some sort of safety leadership development. If you use a particular model like LEAD or something else that's a bit broader, you'll see benefits in your production, your quality, in other areas as well. So it's sort of trying to kick a couple of goals with one thing.
All right. Okay. So that is all the questions. Thank you very much for joining us today, Tristan. That's been fantastic. I'll send out an email later today with the video and the podcast, so you can share that with others. Help convince people.
Sure.
So thanks a lot, Tristan, and hope everyone has a great week coping with these challenging times, and we'll see you next week. Thanks. Okay.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.